Hello and welcome back to another episode of Mystery Red Reads. I am your host, Mystery Red, and this is my disclaimer. This beta read in concrete is at the author's request. This video is for learning purposes. Today we're doing a beta read in concrete for The Great Wicked. We're looking at a piece of fan fiction. This is their rewrite, revision of Chapter 3 of their Star Wars fanfic, Unbreakable Bonds, which you can read on Archive of Our Own. And I will include a link to my reads for her first and second, and even the last revision. The last read I did for her before she did this revision of Chapter 3. So I've got reads for videos for chapters 1 through 3, and then this will be my second one for Chapter 3. And then I've also will include a link to this beautiful story. And so on that note, we are going to dive right in here. I'm not going to give you much of a summary because we're just going to read the one she's got here, and I would refer you back to the other videos so that you know what is going on. Okay, here we go. Oh, all right, I'm ready. Okay, after a week of deadlock within the council, the mounting pressure weighs heavily on Anakin. To shield his Jedi secrets from Padme, he distances himself, causing tension between them. Anakin's return to Padme's side reveals his burden, prompting her to seek the truth. Shocked by Anakin's revelation that Obi-Wan has a son, Padme is sworn to secrecy. As the council debates, Solon struggles to adjust to life at the temple, anxious for the decision. Meanwhile, Cressida meets with a former ally of her late master, and upon returning home, finds Solon disheartened. To lift his spirits, she engages him in a relaxed training session, using the opportunity to discuss the complexities of attachment and the ongoing deliberations of the Jedi Council. And I tripped over that line because my brain was thinking, I just realized Cressida, the first time I read this, I remember her coming in and talking to Solon, but I don't remember if she had mentioned, because it says she went to meet with a former ally of her late master. I'm now curious as to what they talked about and how that conversation went. And I don't remember having that reader impression the first time that I read this, that I'm reading for multiple people. So if I don't remember something that I have said, that would be why. But then again, I don't remember having that thought. And so as I read this line, I was like, ooh, I wonder what happened, what her conversation was like with him. I wonder if we're going to find out. Anyway, even if we don't find out in this chapter, I'm wondering if we'll find out in the future, or if it was just she was out doing something and it's not a big deal at all. I don't know. We'll see. Notes. A few quick notes. This story is rated E for adult content, including depictions of violence and encounters between consenting adults, but this chapter contains no explicit content. Any E content will be marked by a double page break. Galactic Standard Week consists of about 5 days depending on where you are. They are as follows: Prime Day, Syntax Day, Tongs Day, Zel Day, Bendu Day. Interesting. Okay, interesting. Chapter 3. This is part 2 of the Unbreakable Bonds saga, but you do not have to read part 1, as it just provides the history of the events that brought Obi-Wan and Cressida together. This is an explicit work. Well, you have done really well at tagging your story, and people have no excuse for not reaching for the exit if they need to. Oh, here I am. Chapter number 4. Thank you to Mystery Red Reads for reading my content and being so kind with your crits and praise. Go check out her channel. Oh, thank you. Oh my goodness. Okay. I think I said that the first time too. I have to admire her graphics. Okay. I like some canon divergence, so let's go. Chapter 3. Lessons in Perspective and Patience. This chapter contains no explicit content. All right. I'm going to get me a good breath and we're going to go at this. Fall has not been kind to asthma, and it's just getting started. All right, here we go. It had been an exceptionally long week, and Anakin felt as if he had aged more than he should have. As he moved through the temple, he often caught himself studying the lines etched into his fellow masters' faces. He wondered how much of it was simply the passage of time and how much was the result of stress, secrets, and the burden of guiding the order. He didn't know much about Master Yoda's species. Few did. But he couldn't help but wonder if his 900 years might have been a bit kinder had he not walked the path of a Jedi. The High Council had once again failed to reach a determination concerning the future of Sullen Kyle, and it was beyond exasperating. Each day there they sat, a room of the wisest beings in the galaxy, and none of them could agree on what to do. The meetings were grueling and often sprawled on for hours, with every possibility and angle brought up, discussed, and brought up again. The ongoing debate between adhering to traditional doctrines or adapting or evolving circumstances. Change, arguably the thing Jedi feared most. More than once, masters had flip-flopped on their stances, multiple times reassessing long-held beliefs, which in a way was progress. However, it also meant that they were no closer to a decision than they had been on day one. And my little reader brain is starting to pop up with little thoughts. This is reading beautifully, but it's having reader thoughts. So like when I'm reading this opening line, I'm thinking politics, politicians. They do a whole lot. They drag things out and they make things more complicated than they need to be, on and on and on. Okay. And everybody wants to have their say and everybody wants to be right and nobody wants to give. And then my next thought was like, let's see, where was it? I lost it. I think the largest one was that first one. It's going to bother me now. It might have been actually before it. I think I was thinking of, you know what it was? I was thinking of how, and I've thought this several times, how Anakin and his unique beginning with the Jedi is so kind of like Solin's that I relate the two, so I can see Anakin, recognizing that, and I like when he has spoken up for Sullen in the past already. I just see a lot of common history there, a common start, I suppose, where they're both kind of like not expected. So it is interesting. I'm curious as to what the council is going to come up with. Okay, I've lost my spot. This is why I have to keep my thoughts short. All right, so they are no closer to a decision than they have been on day one. And they're assessing their long-held beliefs, which I feel like they were assessing when Anakin was first being assessed. Okay, and I said a whole lot of assessing there. Here we go. He huffed out a breath, nostalgic for the times when Obi-Wan's disappointed lectures were his biggest concern. He almost missed the scoldings he'd received over losing his lightsaber. Not once, but multiple times. Along with the frustration in Obi-Wan's voice whenever Anakin's reckless piloting of speeders and starships earned him a new set of gray hairs. Those moments felt distant now, eclipsed by the endless cycle of unproductive council meetings. Anakin longed for the familiar comfort of those reprimands, yearning for simpler times. Life now was far more complicated. Secrets were nothing new to Anakin. Stars knew he'd had his share of them, but now as a master, he was expected to guard the councils as well. The decision had been set forth that any discussion of the boy or his future within the order should stay squarely within the council chamber walls. It made perfect sense. Even Anakin could see the wisdom in it. With the Jedi Order already shaken by recent scandals, his clandestine marriage to Padme, and the impending birth of their children, whispers of hypocrisy surrounded the Order, with many questioning their methods and integrity. The Jedi were struggling to recover from the devastation of the Clone Wars, with their numbers greatly reduced from disasters like Geonosis, in which over 170 Jedi perished. Not to mention their public image wasn't as polished as it had been in generations past. Then there was the public fallout from Palpatine's arrest and the ensuing power grab. No one knew who to trust. The pressure was mounting, and while eyes shifted many places, he knew many would look to the Order, even if they looked on in suspicion. The weight of these secrets, combined with the Order's increasingly fragile state, was beginning to take a toll on him. By the week's end, Anakin was mentally kicking himself for ever desiring the title of master in the first place. It was nothing but trouble and steered far closer into the realm of politics than he liked. There, that kind of goes back to my thought where it was just like typical politicians to bicker over something and drag it out. And sometimes, of course, I'm sure in the instance of Jedi, they're not dragging out taxpayers' dollars on something ridiculous that is very simple. But this one caught me as funny because it's he's by the week's end, Anakin's mentally kicking himself forever. If it would highlight the line I'm wanting, this one right here, because he says he's kicking himself forever desiring the title of master in the first place. I think that's particularly amusing because I remember being very young and wanting to be a manager so bad because managers were the boss. And then you grow up and you become an adult and you become a manager and you're like, wait, I have a boss anyway. So the manager has a boss. Who's his boss? And then he has a boss. And the higher up you go, the more you're responsible for and the worse it is. It's not at all like what we imagine. Okay. Anyway, reader thoughts. We're going to keep going. The sleek metallic doors of the turbo lift glided open with a soft whoosh, unveiling the peaceful hallway on the highest level of the senatorial apartments. A wave of cool and refreshing air kissed his face as he stopped off. Only a long corridor stood between him and home. I kind of wanted that one to be stepped off. I'm just going to reread it that way, and you pick which one you like. A wave of cool and refreshing air kissed his face as he stepped off. Only a long corridor stood between him and home. But whatever you choose, I think is fine. We're going to keep going. Despite the 30-minute walk from the temple to the Senate district being one he knew by heart, it hadn't brought him much clarity. There was only the gentle rhythmic thumping of his heavy boots on the marble floor to keep his thoughts company as he worked to entangle them. Ultimately, he saw no success. He still had no idea as to what he would say to Padme. What reason could he give for his behavior in the last week? The apartment's door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the dimly lit expanse of the living quarters. His presence in their home lately had been more of a shadow. Rising early to leave and slipping in late, each time he crossed the threshold he felt the constant encumbrance of the council's secrets bearing down on him. Secrets he couldn't share. As a result, he'd thrown himself into the grind of temple life, extra duties, extended training sessions, and lectures he'd attended but rarely absorbed. He loosened the fastenings of his cloak, letting it fall into the back of the chair, but he felt no lighter. He didn't even like staying at the temple. It made him feel so uneasy. It didn't feel like a home. It truly never had. The sterile halls with their formal and minimal decor and the strict rituals devoid of warmth made it feel more like sleeping in a museum or a prison. Nothing like the home he shared with Padme. I'm going to pause. We've got feel 3 times in this paragraph. We've got it here and here and here. Oops, there. Okay, right there. So, it's okay, right? The paragraph works. There's absolutely nothing. It read fine. I'm undecided on this use of feel. I'm going to say this. I'm undecided on this repetitive use of the word feel in this paragraph because we're completely talking consistently. It's Anakin talking about his feelings and he's describing them. So I'm kind of undecided. It's like a lot of times I shy away from the word feel anyway because I want to just to show that. I don't want to tell it, but we're in Anakin's thoughts at this point. He's musing things over. And sometimes in our thoughts, we do use the same word over and over again. A lot of times, especially if we're trying to sort out our feelings, which he literally is. So this one is completely, I feel like this use of it is kind of a personal preference. So if it works for you, keep it. If you personally are irked by the repetitious use of the word, then I would suggest changing it. Those are my musings over that, and I am going to move on. Her influence had turned their shared space into a refuge filled with the life and comfort he craved. Something his mother had always managed to create, even in the harsh conditions of Tatooine. Staying away for so long had made him utterly miserable. When excuses were stripped away, all that was left was truth and lies. He was resolved he would not lie to Padme. He could feel her gaze on him before he saw it, and he looked up. There, framed by the elegant archway that led into their shared bedroom, stood Padme. Her posture was composed, the lines of her figure commanding yet graceful even in the late stages of pregnancy. The loose-fitting clothes she had worn to conceal her pregnancy were now replaced by regal garments that accentuated her soft, rounded baby bump. It was a sight that brought a smile to his weary face. Okay. I'm pausing again because I'm musing over using pregnancy twice. I mean, it's very personal preference. And so I'm indecisive, and I don't like it when I'm indecisive. So this is not about the paragraph. This is about me. Make up your mind. What do you recommend here? I lean towards personal preference because, again, we're with his thoughts. He's churning them over. Their thoughts can be repetitious. It's a personal preference thing. I'm pointing it out because I noticed it. It did not hinder my read, but I did notice it. And so it is my duty to point that out to you. I think otherwise, we also had, there framed by the elegant archway that led into their shared bedroom, stood Padme. Okay. I kind of was wanting it to be, there she stood. But then it doesn't have that nice feel to it. And this is a very Star Wars voice. So I kind of feel like the way it is works, if that makes sense. Like, you know, if I was reading for a different genre or a different fandom, I would want it to be just there, framed by the elegant archway that led to their bedroom. There she stood, or there she stood, framed by the elegant archway. Yeah, see, I probably would have moved there she stood, framed by the elegant archway that led to their shared bedroom. I would have said led to their bedroom. That would be a different fandom, you know, different genre altogether, just a different voice. So the way that this works for the fandom. But we had Padme here, so we've got close repetition, and so it kind of, I think that kind of, I noticed that. That's what I'm going to say. I noticed that. When excuses were stripped away, all that was left was truth and lies. He was resolved he would not lie to Padme. He could even say here, his wife, and then say Padme here and not change it. Let's try that, and then I'm going to move on, because with this fandom, it's very, there's a lot of repetition kind of in it because of the formality, and the use of names is one of those things. I'm going to say I noticed it. I'm going to make my little suggestion, and then we're going to move on. When excuses were stripped away, all that was left was truth and lies. He was resolved he would not lie to his wife. He could feel her gaze on him before he saw it, and he looked up. There, framed by the elegant archway that led into their shared bedroom, stood Padme. Okay, so I think what's not working for me now that I've done it that way, because I did like this actually, and I kind of want to make me smile, because when you say, I'm not going to lie to my wife, that is a very human thought, or something that people say a lot. I'm not going to lie to my husband. I'm not going to lie to my wife. I'm not going to lie to my significant other. And so that made it, changing that made it more relatable to me. And I smiled a little bit when I read it. So I do like that recommendation. And then this sentence I'm back to again, and she's already looking upon him. Okay, so before he saw it, and he could feel her gaze on him before he saw her and looked up. Maybe that. He could feel her gaze on him before he saw her and looked up. Or I kind of wonder if we should just take that one out, and then maybe the next one. There she stood, framed by the elegant archway that led into their shared bedroom. I wonder, I'm just going to play with this for a second. When excuses were stripped away, all that was left was truth and lies. He was resolved he would not lie to his wife. There she stood, framed by the elegant archway that led into their shared bedroom. Her posture was composed, the lines of her figure commanding yet graceful even in the late stages of pregnancy. Yeah, I liked that a lot better. That is going to be my recommendation, is to just take this sentence out and make that little adjustment to this line and swap that out for his wife. And I actually really liked that. So that's my suggestion. We're going to keep going. Her eyes were filled with serenity, and looking into them was to be home. Yet a stern and despondent expression marred her otherwise beautiful features. a queen's facade that masked a deep, troubling sadness, one that he knew he was responsible for. His lips parted and his breath hitched as he prepared to speak, ready to utter the words, "I'm sorry," as many times as she needed to hear it. But before he could utter a word, she raised a commanding hand, silencing him with a gesture. We've got a word echo on utter, and that is why I hesitated on that line, because my brain was point that out. I caught so that's what that was about. I'm actually going to give it another read and see if I can not let my brain hiccup over the echo. And then I'm actually just going to point the echo out and move on, and you can do what you want with it. His lips parted and his breath hitched as he prepared to speak, ready to utter the words, "I'm sorry," as many times as she needed to hear it. But before he could utter a word, she raised a commanding hand, silencing him with a gesture. That was better. I didn't change anything. I just didn't want my brain I didn't want to mess up the line because my brain was caught on an echo. And you could easily swap that out before he could speak a word. And your problem solved. Super simple. "Anakin," she began, her voice steady and giving nothing away of how she was feeling. "I understand that there are things within the temple that you can't always share with me. I know you have secrets and responsibilities as a master, and I respect that. I would never ask you to tell me what you can't, nor will I ever deliver an ultimatum on the subject." Her tone carried the lilt of diplomacy and the firm resolve of a woman who had ruled and now served. "But I know something is greatly troubling you, and this distance between us," she continued, her gaze piercing through his defenses as she lowered her hand. "This is where I draw the line." Oh my goodness, I like that. Okay, I had swapped that out on my own while reading from "and" to "as" and making it kind of active. Yeah. Instead of it, and that kind of made it flow a little bit better, as the "and" would have felt distancing. Like she's speaking, then she's lowering her hand. But as she's lowering her hand while she's speaking, it worked better for me. Anyway, we're going to keep going. His throat tightened, ice flooded his veins, and a familiar fear of loss and abandonment sent his heart racing. He swallowed hard and nodded, willing every inch of his form to remain calm. "Pads, he began, his tall frame lumbered closer, each step heavy with fatigue and regret. "Shh," she interjected softly, her resolve crumbling just enough to allow her arms to envelop him in a gentle embrace. "I've missed you, Annie." His arms, though strong, trembled as they hurriedly wrapped around her, and he rested his cheek atop her head. I don't think there's anything like wrong with hurried. Is it supposed to be hurriedly? Maybe I've just not. Is this a thing? A quick and rushed manner. Hurriedly. It's missing an I. Hurriedly. And it's an adverb. His arms, though strong, trembled as I kind of want to say take it out. Let's just try it without it and see what you think. His arms, though strong, trembled as they wrapped around her, and he rested his cheek atop her head. Yeah, honestly, it works even better, and I'm actually more caught up in it without the adverb. We're going to keep going. "I've missed you, Padme," he whispered back, the confession coming out as a breath laced with the ache of too much time spent apart. As a breath laced with the ache of too much time spent apart. As a breath. Okay, so it's I'm contemplating that. As a breath laced with the ache of too much time spent apart. I get it. It's almost like describing his voice without saying voice. Instead, it's in the breath. Like the pain is actually in the breath. So I get it. I don't know how I feel about it. I don't not like it. I think it has a sound to it that is attractive, but I have to be careful because sometimes the pretty words don't actually work, and I don't want to tell you wrong. So I'm not sure about that one. I'm going to read it again. "I've missed you, Padme," he whispered back, the confession coming out as a breath laced with the ache of too much time spent apart. "I'm sorry." Okay, so when I read it again, I like it. I think I like it. I don't know if I should like it, if that makes any sense to anyone at all. Sometimes I write like this, and when I go back and I look at it, and I'm like still loving it, and someone else comes along and is like, that is not working. You need to take that out of there. And so because you're describing the pain in the breath, and I get it. See, like I get it. I'm gonna move on from it. It worked when I read it. My mind kind of gave pause to wondering whether or not it's correct, and because typically our voice is laced with the ache of too much time spent apart. But I know we don't want to say that because we're trying to show how much he's missed her. And I'm there's parts in here, when we describe all these sensations that we have that. I'm going to say that I kind of wonder if, like, when he says, I missed you, Padme, I kind of imagine him, because he said he rested his cheek atop her head. I almost see him, like, burying his face, like, in the crook of her neck or something, and just kind of, like, relax, like, taking a breath and feeling a little release at being close to her and being home. So I kind of have that visual of just being like great, that little gratitude that comes out of you when you're really glad to be back with someone. I'm getting that out of his breath, but because I'm unsure about the breath being laced with ache, that's the part I'm unsure about. Like, I get it, but I had to stop and think about it. And so it makes me wonder, because we know that you were trying to do something other than say voice, and there's a sensation. And so when I read this line, I kind of see him saying, I've missed you, Padme, and burying his face like in her shoulder or something, and just maybe even inhaling the scent of her or something, that just feeling a sensation of home, of a little bit of relief, even though they're having this difficult conversation. That just that sensation of being grateful to be close to someone that you feel safe with. Yeah. Okay, I've spent way too much time on that line, so we are going to move on. Whatever is weighing on you, know that you will always have my trust, and I will never force you to share what you can't. But you don't have to carry those burdens alone. Please come back to me. Relief thawed the ice that had held his heart in a death grip, and the warmth of her love chased away his fears and insecurities. He was safe. They were safe. Oh, that says they was. I think we want they were. But I read it correctly, even though it wasn't the right word. We're going to keep going. He nodded vigorously and pressed a kiss to her forehead. I'm going to point out the adverb. We're going to read it without it. He nodded and pressed a kiss to her forehead, his gloved hands cradling her head. We get an echo on forehead and head just because they have similar sounds. I kind of don't want them to be together. He nodded and pressed a kiss to her brow, his gloved hands cradling her head. How's that? Her understanding was a kindness he didn't deserve, and for a few moments they stood together like that. With her smaller frame engulfed by his, he held his entire world in his arms. He just needed a moment longer to hold on to her, them to anchor himself to something he knew was steadfast. I'm going to pause because that line that I spent all that time on, I got everything I wanted in the following lines. So ignore me and just let it go. Oh my goodness. I got everything I wanted in here. All those feelings and sensations, they were all waiting for me. I just need to keep reading. And that happens sometimes. All right, we're going to keep going. He counted his breaths, calming himself until her hand on his shoulder gently pushed him back, breaking their embrace. His arms dropped to his sides, his eyes lingering on the swell of her stomach before meeting hers. His fingers twitched, aching to touch her, but he hesitated. After a moment, she smiled softly and guided his hands to her belly, granting his silent wish. The relief was instant. Even though she no longer held the title of queen, Anakin still knelt before her without hesitation. He pressed his forehead against Padme's stomach in a reverent gesture. Her hand rested on his bowed head, and as she stroked his hair. I think we don't want the and. I'm going to go again without the and. Even though she no longer held the title of queen, Anakin still knelt before her without hesitation. He pressed his forehead against Padme's stomach in a reverent gesture. Her hand rested on his bowed head as she stroked his hair. All traces of tension disappeared. His shoulders loosened and his jaw unclenched. He took a final and deep cleansing breath, feeling the air fill his lungs and holding it there before releasing it. Together, they were one. With a slow and deliberate movement, he stood up straight, his chest rising and falling steadily. What I'm about to tell you has to stay between us, Padme, he intoned cautiously. The Council is facing something of a crisis. No one outside knows, and it has to stay that way. Padme raised an eyebrow and smirked. Of course, because I've never been party to keeping scandalous secrets, she teased. Then, with a reassuring smile, she quickly added, You know you have my confidence, Anakin. Your secrets are always safe with me. Oops, I said your secrets are always safe with me, but your secrets are safe with me. Always. I would like to read that again and do it right. Hang on just 1 second. Let's see. Padme raised an eyebrow and smirked. Of course, because I've never been party to keeping scandalous secrets, she teased. Then, with a reassuring smile, she quickly added, You know you have my confidence, Anakin. Your secrets are safe with me, always. In his heart, he knew he could trust her, but the guilt still nipped at his heels. He was, as Master Yoda would say, was breaking another rule. But with the Council trapped in endless maddening debates, he needed an outlet for his frustration and perspective. Who better to turn to than his other half? He guided her gently to sit on the edge of their bed, feeling... I'm pausing. My brain hit on gently, and I'm wondering if we've used it recently. Why is it doing that? Did we... There it is. Right there. And I'm not going to mark it. I'm just going to move my little cursor back and forth over it, and I'm going to point it out, and we're going to move on. And because my brain hit on it, and I was like, okay, I wasn't even sure where I had seen it. It just caught it. All right, here we go. He guided her to sit on the edge of their bed, feeling the soft mattress yield beneath them. Settling down beside her, he let his shoulders sag, burying his face in his hands, a low, weary groan escaping his lips. Okay, I'm going to pause on this line. I think we have just a hint too many somethings. Settling down beside her, he let his shoulders sag, burying his face in his hands, a low, weary groan escaping his lips. There's just a couple too many's of something. I would pick one, maybe two, and pair them to shorten that. Because, let's see. Settling down beside her, he let his shoulders sag and buried his face in his hands. Yeah. You could make that into two sentences, but it might still feel like too much when I read them consecutively, because we've got a description, and it's a really long description of like what he's doing. Yeah. He guided her to sit on the edge of their bed, feeling the soft mattress yield beneath them. Settling down beside her, he let his shoulders sag, burying his face in his hands with a groan. I mean, you could even shorten it that way. That might help if you want the groan in there, because I kind of see him, like I see him sitting down beside her and burying his face in his hands and then just groaning. I can see that. It might have just been too wordy, so you might still be able to get it in with that last recommendation I made if you really want the groan in there. You're fine without it, though, and we're going to keep going. Beside him, Padme sat with her hands up. Here we go. Okay. I would take the were out. That's why I'm tripping. Okay, let's try it without it. Beside him, Padme sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap, and she radiated a calm... I'm going to pause again. Okay. Instead of saying, and she radiated, you could say, radiating a calm grace. Radiating a calm grace that made him feel inadequate as a Jedi Master. Okay, let's try this. Beside him, Padme sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap, radiating a calm grace that made him feel inadequate as a Jedi Master. I almost don't want calm in there either, because grace is such a beautiful word anyway, that she's kind of also stoic at the same time, though. She is very chill. She's just radiating a calming grace. How about that? Let's try this. Beside him, Padme sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap, radiating a calming grace that made him feel inadequate as a Jedi Master. As he struggled with his thoughts, she reached out and placed a gentle hand on his knee, giving it a reassuring squeeze. He met her gaze and simply said, "Obi-Wan has a son." There weren't many things that could render Padme Amidala speechless. She sat frozen in place, her gaze fixed and unblinking, as though caught in a moment of suspended animation. For a solid 30 seconds, she didn't move a muscle. Anakin couldn't help but recall how just a week earlier he had been in the exact same position, mouth slightly agape, brain struggling to catch up, as if the revelation had sent his thoughts spiraling into hyperspace. Finally, she blinked once, twice, her eyes fluttering in almost comical disbelief, the gears of her mind visibly grinding as she tried to process the 4 simple words Anakin had just spoken. Obi-Wan has... She trailed off in disbelief. Anakin nodded. Yes. Obi-Wan has a... Her voice rose an octave. Okay, my voice didn't rise because I wanted to stop. I want to keep reading because it's reading well. But I made myself stop because I needed to give my note. I would just take out the adverb. You don't need it. Let's see. Obi-Wan has a... Her voice rose an octave. Yes, Anakin repeated, his tone dry, but also a bit amused. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He watched as her attention span, as well as her gaze, just sort of drifted, much like Obi-Wan had done when he first heard the news. Anakin waited, tapping his fingers lightly against his thigh, counting the seconds it would take for the realization to hit. Then suddenly, as if a switch had been flipped, her head snapped back to him with the intensity of a laser cannon. "Obi-Wan Kenobi? Our Obi-Wan?" she blurted out in a rush of incredulity. "The one and the same," Anakin confirmed, already feeling a sense of relief. Wait, when could... She stammered as trying to piece together several questions, but failing. They all just jumbled together into a verbal mess. Yeah, I struggled over my own mouth. Oh my goodness. Okay. Excuse me. This is going great. My brain was like, I had taken out... I still keep not wanting to stop because it's reading well, but I suggest just taking his name out and let it keep flowing, because we just said Anakin here, and I know we're in the fandom and all, but I just did it without it and I liked it. Let me see if I can read her line one more time without tripping over my own words. Okay, let's see. When could... She stammered, trying to piece together several questions, but failing. They all just jumbled together into a verbal mess. It was funny watching his normally eloquent and articulate wife stumble over her words. He found an odd sort of catharsis in her shared bewilderment. She looked at him wide-eyed and at complete loss, but fortunately Anakin knew exactly what she was trying to ask because he'd already thought it too. "A blood test confirmed the paternity earlier this week," Anakin explained. "And his midichlorian count." He paused, meeting her expectant gaze. 16,000. 16,000? He looked on her as her pupils nearly overtook the brown of her eyes, no doubt trying to work out the whole thing like it was a puzzle. She looked to the same unremarkable patch of floor her eyes had found earlier, and then again up at Anakin sharply. All Anakin could do was nod again, biting back a smile at the absurdity of it all. Satine? The name slipped out before she could stop herself, even though she knew Satine was gone. He shook his head. "It's someone from Obi-Wan's past, a sentinel. Last Prime Day, she returned with a 10-year-old son." 10? Padme's shock was a continual relief to Anakin, who had been thinking and feeling the exact same things for over a week now. But how could Obi-Wan be unaware of his son's existence for 10 years? We've got extra space right here, and going on. Let's see. "From what we know, and we don't know much," Anakin explained, "shortly after she and Obi-Wan were together, Cressida departed on an off-world assignment." I've got an extra space right there. "Cressida?" Padme asked, interrupting him. Anakin stuttered a moment. He'd revealed more than he'd meant to, but little could be done about the slip of the tongue, so he just nodded. Yes, Cressida Vox. He relented at first. A first and last name wasn't wise, but what was the harm now? Such a beautiful name, she murmured, as if she was testing it out. Anyway, she was working under an established alias, completely isolated from the Order. She gave birth to her son during her assignment, and had no other option but to keep him hidden to protect the mission's integrity, as well as safeguard their lives. I swapped out it for him, and I think I talked about this one in the last video. That's a personal preference, and I'm just saying him specifically for this fandom because it's so formal. We're going to keep going. Padme was quiet for a moment, quickly regaining some of her faltered composure. No one knew? Her superiors? The High Council? Her master? No one, he shook his head. Sentinels operate under a different authority than we do. They're primarily accountable to the Council of First Knowledge, which in turn answers to the Grand Master. Selectively. Meaning the Grand Master only knew what the Council of First Knowledge wanted him to know. I'm going to pause. There was a little space right there. I'm going to keep right on going. It wasn't a small thing he just divulged, and Anakin couldn't shake the guilt of adding more to Padme's already heavy load, especially with the babies on the way. But her hand still rested on his knee, and he gave it another squeeze. She was still with him. But Jedi have had children before, haven't they? Anakin gave a sideways nod, suggesting the simplistic nature of the question did not come with a simplistic answer. What happens then? A more sensitive subject would be difficult to find. See, this is an example of not a word echo. This was done intentionally and done correctly. We're going to keep going. It's complex, he sighed, letting out another breath and taking her hand in his. Jedi have had children, yes. In the days of the Old Republic, it was commonplace for Jedi to not only have children, but to marry as well. I'm not sure when the practice was forbidden exactly, but even after attachments were banned, Jedi still had children. We're not celibate. Resentment colored his words, but he didn't linger on it. Our quotation marks here are kind of hanging out in space. I think they go here. Some exceptions have been made more recently with the approval of the High Council, like Master Ki-Adi-Mundi. His species is greatly endangered with a critically low birth rate among males. The council permitted him to return home to marry. He has 5 wives and 7 daughters, all of whom he has virtually no contact with. It wasn't a topic often broached. Ki-Adi-Mundi's multiple marriages were well known within the order, but less discussed was the fact that despite his efforts, the numerous daughters he fathered didn't exactly alleviate his species' population crisis. An awful irony in Anakin's opinion. Typically, when a Jedi has a child, the child is taken from the parents at a very young age and raised within the Jedi Order. This practice helps ensure that the child grows up without forming strong emotional attachments, which could hinder their training and adherence to the Jedi Code. It's entirely plausible for a parent and child to go through their entire lives without forming a close relationship. Their roles would keep them on separate paths, with little personal interaction until adulthood, if ever. That's even if the child was force-sensitive. I'm wondering if there should be a comma there. Totally wondering, not completely sure. Gonna keep going. Padme's face tightened with a mixture of anxiety and horror as she asked, what would happen if the child wasn't force-sensitive? His heart sank as he saw the dread in her eyes, and he hesitated to answer her. Her distress was like a knife to his gut. He shouldn't have even mentioned it. Of course it would upset her. He cursed his short-sightedness. The Order's focus is on nurturing those with a connection to the Force, he began slowly. If a child didn't meet the minimum midichlorian count needed for training, they would likely be placed with a family outside the Order or given to a guardian who could teach them a trade or a skill to live. They would lead a separate life from the Jedi and might never know their parents. Her hand immediately recoiled from his. I pause. Luke comes to mind when I read that. Anyway, we're going to keep going. Her hand immediately recoiled from his, instinctively covering her mouth as a shuddering gasp escaped. Her other hand moved protectively to cradle her pregnant belly. The stark contrast between the Jedi's detached logic and the raw, visceral pain in her eyes struck him like a blow. Regret surged through him as he heard her weak sniffle and saw the growing glassy sheen in her eyes. I'm going to pause for a second. So like, I'm kind of wondering if like, okay, so Padme's not a Jedi. So I'm kind of wondering like, if the child didn't have the minimum midichlorian count, or basically, if, what about this, if the parent wasn't a Jedi like Padme is not, why would she need to give up? Why would the not Jedi mother, or not Jedi parent, in case the mother was a Jedi and the father was not, why couldn't they just raise them? I guess, I mean, yeah, because at that point the bond between them wouldn't matter. And honestly, I disagree with this whole entire plan anyway, because I feel like the bond strengthens you. But anyway, we're going to keep going. Padme, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. Again, she held up her hand to still his apologies, stifling the near sobs that almost broke free. He watched as she struggled to blink away the unshed tears and mask her sadness. Seeing her so affected, so close to breaking down, made him wish he could undo the words he had spoken. She looked at the ground in an effort to compose herself. Each little staccato breath she took further twisted the metaphorical knife in his heart. I can't imagine just letting our children go with no certainty of ever seeing them again. Her words were barely above a whisper, almost too awful to speak. I would never let that happen, Padme, he said fiercely, his eyes fixating onto hers with unwavering determination. If it ever came to that, I wouldn't hesitate to leave the order with you and our children. He reached out, gently brushing away the tear that had slipped down her cheek. She nodded rapidly, sniffing quietly before changing the subject. I'm going to pause. So we have two adverbs in here. My suggestion would be to omit them both or pick one of the two, but not to have two in the same sentence. We're going to keep going. But the boy is force sensitive, she said, her voice growing more steady. They wouldn't simply place him elsewhere, would they? It is difficult to say. In this case, he is already 10 years old, well beyond the usual age for initiation into the order. This presents its own set of challenges. Such as? She asked, her composure snapping back into place so swiftly that only the hint of her earlier upset was the faint redness in her eyes. That's a long sentence. Oh my goodness. Yep, it's a little bit of a long sentence. It works. I had to kind of push to get it out. Kind of makes me wonder if we should break it into two. I like the description of the redness in her eyes. I can see her. She's gaining back her. She's pulling out of her emotions here. She's getting back into mama mode now and mama queen mode. So, such as, she asked, her composure snapping back into place so swiftly that only a hint of her earlier upset was the faint redness in her eyes. Okay, I got it the second time I read it. It's long. I'm going to note it and we're going to move on. Padme's capacity to push her emotions aside to deal with the present in a detached manner never failed to amaze Anakin. She would have made the superior Jedi, he was sure. I've always thought that too, to be honest. He pushed himself up from the bed, his hands resting on his hips as he began to pace back and forth. Suppose he is allowed to begin training. His only instruction so far has come from his mother, and due to her situation, their training was kept secret. As a result, his training is inconsistent. Normally, evaluation happens with a clan of younglings who have been together since childhood. He can't just be thrown into a clan of kids who've grown up together. That won't work. The ghost of resentment again colored Anakin's words, reflecting his own personal experience. Any gaps in his training would need to be addressed before the initiate trials. Who would train him until then? Where would he stay? How would his training be organized? As Anakin continued to pace, his frustration and concern evident in his every movement. Pausing, because the sentence ended, but I thought it was going to continue. As Anakin continued to pace, his frustration and concern were evident in his every movement. Either became evident or were evident, but they have to do something right in between concern and evident in order for this to be a full sentence that I did not feel like needed to continue. We're going to read it with the word were in there, and then we're going to keep going. As Anakin continued to pace, his frustration and concern were evident in his every movement. His shoulders grew tight again and his steps grew heavy and quicker. He made several laps across the expanse of their bedroom as he worked himself back up. Padme's brows knitted together at the transformation taking place before her, but as quickly as it had started, his steps faltered. Okay, I kind of wanted a comma right there, and we're going to keep going. He paused, staring out the nearby window, as if searching for answers among the stars. After a moment, he turned back to Padme. And what about his parents? He spent his whole life with his mother. Will she be allowed to remain in her son's life, or just sent back into the shadows? If so, how will that affect her ability to do her duty? Will they make an exception for her because of the nature of her work and experiences? Or will they think it too great a risk either way? How will it affect him? And what about Obi-Wan? 10 years ago, he had a son, but it was only a week ago that he became a father. Then that particular statement was perhaps the most impactful. He missed out on the first 10 years of the boy's life. Will the council even permit him to establish any sort of relationship now that he knows about him? He left the second part of his question unspoken, that being what if the council decided to forbid any relationship between Obi-Wan and his son at all? Obi-Wan insists there was no romantic attachment, but can two people with a past like theirs truly remain impartial, especially when it involves raising a child conceived from their physical relationship? The council is uncertain about how to handle the situation, questioning whether past connections might complicate their objectivity and impact the child's training within the order. Okay. Okay, what I'm kind of using out two things. I feel like all of this is Anakin still talking. We got it correctly. There is no dialogue tag, but I know that it's still him, so take that for what you will. And there was a line I feel like I said that I just kind of thought was a little bit long. I kept wanting to read it. I wanted to keep reading, so I didn't stop. And sometimes I regret doing that because I lost what I was thinking. I'll lose my thought or I'll lose my spot. I think it might have been this one. I'm going to go back one because it might have been that one, or both of them are kind of long, generally speaking. So there's opportunity to break them into two sentences. Is there one? Obi-Wan insists there was no romantic attachment. That could almost be a statement. And, I very, very sparingly begin a sentence with the word but or and. But we do speak that way, as I just started a sentence with the word but. Obi-Wan insists there was no romantic attachment. But can two people with a past like theirs truly remain impartial, especially when it involves raising a child conceived from their physical relationship? The council is uncertain about how to handle the situation. And I kind of want to put a period there. They're questioning whether past connections might complicate their objectivity and impact the child's training within the order. See, so even if I put a period here, and then said they're questioning whether it's still a long sentence because we've got, bigger words in here. Bigger words. But they're fine. Obviously, this is totally appropriate. All I was looking for was opportunities to break it into a little bit shorter sentences. And literally, that's all the suggestions I have for that. So let's see. The questions tumbled out in a rush, a torrent of thoughts and frustrations, draining the breath from his lungs as he spoke. He hadn't realized just how much he needed to say these things out loud. When he finished, he felt a bit tired, but relieved, and the room finally fell quiet. What will happen to the boy's mother? Padme asked. I'm going to pause because I did swap out a word right there. I said out loud instead of aloud. It is totally fine. I'm just going to leave what I said there and note that I did make a mistake, and both of those are completely interchangeable. Nothing needs to be altered here. Anakin hesitated and shook his head. Honestly, I don't know. I suggested leniency to the council. Padme agreed, but then stopped mid-nod in bewilderment. You mean they might punish her? He grimaced, features twisting unpleasantly. She wasn't going to like this. It's not an impossibility, though it makes little sense. Padme quickly shot to her feet. It makes no sense at all, she declared, marching a few steps as Anakin tried to urge her to sit back down. He was unsuccessful. Padme had been a queen and no stranger to conflict, no matter the scope. She was as fearsome as any Jedi he'd ever seen. She was ferocious, brave, and when pushed, his wife was a force of nature that he feared might tip over. Punished for what? The crime of having a child? Anakin held up his hands in surrender. I'm going to pause. I kind of want to see her face right here. I just want to see her outrage. Like, it's building, you're showing it, it's there. I just want to see her face when she says this. I feel like she's got a flash of anger in those eyes and her brow is furrowed and you almost might even see her teeth. She's mad. And then, and I totally agree with her. And I want her, I don't know if she's going to say it yet because I can't remember, but I want her to be like, and what? If they punish Mama, are they going to punish Obi-Wan too? Because I'm sorry, they're both equal partners in this. But anyway, we're going to keep going. Anakin held up his hands in surrender, a small smile playing on his lips as he tried to calm her. It truly wasn't as simple as that, but in a way, it also was. He hated the juxtaposition. Padme, I'm with you on this one. Given the situation she was in, no support, keeping the secret for a decade, maintaining her cover and assignment's integrity, what other choice did she have? I've been pushing the council to see that any harsh measures would be a disaster. This seemed to calm the storm that was swirling about in his wife, though she didn't sit back down. The harshness of her gaze wasn't meant for Anakin. He was just something of an unfortunate bystander. And at any rate, it's not entirely up to the High Council. It's not even up to the Grand Master alone. The Council of First Knowledge will also have a say in this matter, since she's a Sentinel, and she answers directly to them. And Obi-Wan, she asked. There's my girl. Okay, sorry. Okay. And Obi-Wan, she asked, at last, her voice softening with worry as she crossed her arms over her chest. Skepticism lingered on her face. Stars help anyone who found themselves on the wrong side of Padme Amidala when it came to the people she loved. Where does he stand in all of this? He sunk back onto the bed and his hands dropped to his lap. All traces of levity fell away and his eyes dulled. I don't know, he replied, letting out a deep breath that shook his entire form. No one's seen him in days, probably at Master Windu's request. What do you mean? Okay, I want to see her face right here. When we see her face, I want the visual of it. What, not a long one. Just pick a feature that stands out and show it to me. We're going to keep going. After the initial meeting, Mace suggested it was in the best interest of all parties if Obi-Wan limited his contact with his son and the boy's mother. Really? Really? I'm sorry. We're going to do that again. After the initial meeting, Mace suggested it was in the best interest of all parties if Obi-Wan limited his contact with his son and the boy's mother for the time being. That was definitely the wrong thing to say. Now, she didn't look just offended. Outraged was more like it. Her expression was a mix of shock and fury, her eyes wide and her lips pursed. Why would Mace make such a... I want her outraged so bad. I am stammering over my own line here. Oh my gosh. Let's try that again. Why would Mace make such a suggestion? She threw her hands up in the air in indignation. Surely Obi-Wan and Cressida have more than a few things to talk about. The way she spoke about the Sentinel now, one might be tempted to think Padme was defending a dear friend. But she'd never met the woman. The depth of her empathy just radiated like a river of brilliance in the face of such injustice. I didn't pause, but I really liked it. Her determination and kind spirit had been two of the many things about her all the way back in the sands of Tatooine that first captured his attention, then his heart. Mace entered to err on the side of caution. Emotions were running high, and he trailed off, shaking his head. He's just trying to be, cautious. For what reason? Keeping them from sitting down and opening up a dialogue will only cause friction. It's the same in delegations. I'm going to pause right there, period, and capital I. Let's try it. For what reason? Keeping them from sitting down and opening up a dialogue will only cause friction. It's the same in delegations. If parties refuse to communicate openly, misunderstandings fester and conflicts escalate. The only way to find common ground and resolve issues is through honest conversation. On some level, I agree with you, but Mace has a responsibility to make the decision that's best for everyone, as well as the Order. The Jedi are under more scrutiny than ever before. He needs Obi-Wan to be clear-headed and in the stable place. Right now, he's not. He hoped his words resonated with Padme. As she spoke, he noticed the subtle shift in her expression, almost as if she were seeing him in a different light. A look that made him wonder if, for a moment, she had been taken aback by what he'd said. Even he was sometimes surprised by how own maturity and wisdom. His, I think we want this to be his. We're going to try it again. He hoped his words resonated with Padme. As he spoke, he noticed a subtle shift in her expression, almost as if she were seeing him in a different light. A look that made him wonder if, for a moment, she'd been taken aback by what he'd said. Even he was sometimes surprised by his own maturity and wisdom. One can hardly blame him, she conceded, folding her arms over her chest again. They sat a little higher than usual due to her bump, and it normally struck him as adorable, but he forewent his usual comments. How is he? Anakin rested his elbows on his knees, letting his hair fall around his face. I've never seen him like this before, Padme. He's struggling to find his balance. Anakin's expression grew troubled and a flicker of pain crossed his eyes. The sternness that emanated from Padme was gone, and she quickly found her way to her husband's side. When Obi-Wan saw the Sentinel, he recognized her instantly. He was certain she spoke the truth and refused to entertain any notion that she had deceived him or manipulated the situation. He defended her without hesitation. There wasn't an ounce of doubt. Anakin's voice held a trace of awe as he recalled the events, still mesmerized by the depths of protectiveness that had come from his usually strict and straight-laced master. He didn't mention Mace's uncomfortable line of questioning, knowing that it would likely set her off again, and it wasn't the point. Padme was level-headed, but being so close to motherhood was certainly influencing her thought process lately. Anakin noticed the soft smile that played at Padme's lips as she spoke. Sounds like she made an impression, she suggested, her tone thoughtful. He could see she was picturing it too. The idea of Obi-Wan being so protective of someone, especially a woman, was as surprising to her as it was to him. Anakin, could Obi-Wan or the Sentinel be expelled from the Order? Anakin shook his head with a scoff, his expression both serious and amused. No, I think that's highly unlikely. Obi-Wan is too well respected and has achieved too much within the Order. He's a hero of the Clone Wars, not to mention he trained the Chosen One. He threw in a cocky little smirk, which Padme returned. They won't expel him, even if they are disappointed in him for what? Having sex? Padme exclaimed in an almost laugh. Jedi aren't celibate. She gestured between the two of them and then to her stomach. As you've said, physical relationships aren't forbidden. Why would they possibly be disappointed in him? The Council always seems to find a way to be disappointed in someone, Anakin replied, knowing a bit more on the subject than he'd like, having been on the receiving end of that disappointment more than once. Besides, he's a pivotal figure in the Jedi Order, and losing him would be a significant blow, especially given that the ranks are at an all-time low. The Clone Wars, is it supposed to be R? I think that should be R. I'm going to give pause here. I'm going to go back to this line right here and read forward. Besides, he's a pivotal figure in the Jedi Order, and losing him would be a significant blow, especially given that ranks are at an all-time low. The Clone Wars are over, but the Sith and other threats are far from gone. We need all the Jedi we can for when the next crisis rears its head. We must be prepared. Dismissing seasoned and exemplary Jedi from the Order isn't exactly a good start. And what about the Sentinel? Padme inquired, her curiosity piqued. They definitely won't expel her. They would need the approval of the Council of First Knowledge. They would also need to approve, I kind of want that to be a period, and then a capital T right here, and we're going to try again. They definitely won't expel her. They would need the approval of the Council of First Knowledge. They would also need to prove that she's a clear and present danger or liability to the Order. Everything we've been told suggests that they have no intention of letting her go. Losing her would mean losing all the valuable knowledge and skills she possesses. A Sentinel's work is incredibly vital to the Order, and it takes a unique caliber of Jedi to serve that role. We need them. I can't imagine either council would take such a drastic step. Padme nodded. So what will they do then? Anakin sighed, looking troubled. They may impose certain restrictions or conditions. They could decide to train the boy as a Jedi, but under a careful and impartial eye. They might also assign someone to closely monitor the situation between his parents to ensure that his training is conducted with the utmost caution. That's assuming he would pass the initiate trials. His training was conducted by his mother, and he didn't have the benefit of a class of younglings and learning from multiple masters. He's skilled, but he's at a disadvantage. Okay, I kind of wanted... This could also be a period in a capital H, and you could start a new sentence there, and that would help that not be as long, and that I think it still works. It's a suggestion. We're going to keep going. I understand better now why the council would want this kept quiet and why you've been so distant, she said at last. It wasn't as relieving as he would have hoped. You shouldn't have told me this, but I'm glad you did. No one can know, Padme, Anakin said, his tone a mix of gentle reminder and serious warning. Not yet. She raised a hand, signaling that she understood, though her gaze remained distant. Her expression troubled as if she were lost in deep thought, trying to work something out. I'm going to pause. So, whenever we go to describe Padme's face, we are using the word expression. And I'm contemplating that. I don't exactly have a suggestion, but I will tell you I've noticed it at least 4 times. And I kind of let it go because we had other visuals, or like other things that we were describing surrounding the expression, including, her actual expression. I'm wondering, we probably need to find another word to kind of alternate, or we need to look at the sentence and think about it, rephrasing it or such. I'm not suggesting that solely on this sentence. I'm saying I would screen the document as a whole for the words, for the word expression, and see how often it is popping up for you. I'm hesitant to skim back, but I will tell you I noticed it at least 4 times, and this is, I think, the 4th. And so I'm like, I probably need to mention it. I can scroll through here and find it, but I'm hesitant to do that. I feel like a fast word search will have it pop up for you, and then you're going to see exactly what I'm talking about. So on that note, I'm just going to keep going. What is it? Anakin asked. This is, as you've said, a very sensitive topic, complex and potentially scandalous if misinterpreted. But I wonder, she looked at Anakin with an analytical eye, if the council is even considering making exceptions they've never made before. What prompted this change of heart? What's different now? It makes me think there might be more going on out there. On here. Sorry, I read that wrong. More going on here. And I noticed that sometimes when I read something wrong, it's because I'm thinking about something else at the same time, and not always because of the sentence itself. In this case, I was kind of wondering the same thing Padme was saying. So I think those thoughts were kind of coming through at the same exact time. Part of me wondered if Anakin's backstory might be a reason that they would consider something that is out of the norm. But my thoughts were in line with hers. So anyway, we're going to keep going. At this question, Anakin smiled, relieved at finally having an answer. He gently cupped her cheek, turning her to face him and pressing a kiss to her lips. Okay, nothing wrong with this. I kind of just want one of the 2 actions because, let's see, we've got, at this question, Anakin smiled, relieved at finally having an answer. I think it's the adverb. He cupped her cheek, turning her to face him, and pressed a kiss to her lips. Let's try this. At this question, Anakin smiled, relieved at finally having an answer. He cupped her cheek, turning her to face him, and pressed a kiss to her lips. Yeah, so all I did there was omit the adverb, and then change this from pressing to pressed. We're going to keep going. Us. His meaning remained vague for a moment. It wasn't until her look of confusion softened into the gentle blush that often accompanied his affection that he elaborated. I am so angry that I stammered over that 2 times. We're going to try it again. His meaning remained vague for a moment. It wasn't until her look of confusion softened into the gentle blush that often accompanied his affection that he elaborated. He continued, It's because of us. I'm going to pause. He's going to continue. I'm going to pause. I think, in lieu of saying he continued, omit this part and move this up right here and let that kind of lead into what he says. I'm not going to reread it again because I messed it up that one time and then I finally got it right. But I'm going to pick up right here and just omit that. It's because of us. The fact that our marriage and our child are public knowledge, and that we've shown how strong our bond is without compromising our duties. So much has come to light since Palpatine's arrest. The Council has seen how close we came to losing everything. There's talk lately among the Temple and throughout the galaxy that many are beginning to ask questions, reevaluating their rigid policies. Some are suggesting that attachment and personal connections can be a source of strength, not just a vulnerability. That they must be addressed rather than simply ignored. Solon's case is being considered partly because they see the potential benefits of making an exception, given the lessons learned from our experiences. Your opinion will be vital in their deliberations, Anakin, Padme insisted. Anakin's brow twisted into disbelief and he stifled a laugh as he replied, I appreciate your confidence in me, Padme, but I'm still relatively low on the totem pole when it comes to the High Council. My opinion might not carry as much weight as the more experienced masters. I'm still on thin ice to some. Padme gently cupped his face, pausing. I think we've cupped our face a couple times. I'm not going to go digging back. I'm just going to say I know we had gently pop up more than once, and here we go. He gently cupped her cheek. So, what was mine? I had one of these, a gentle squeeze. I think I had gently squeezed, a gentle squeeze and gently squeezed all throughout one of my most popular stories that was it's called Have Dinner With Me, and it's super, super popular, and it's really actually very well written for honestly a first draft, and it got really good reviews. And then I typically reread my favorite fics like once a year, usually in the wintertime, and then I cringe at all the things I've learned since writing them. But on that one, it was gently squeezed, a reassuring squeeze and gently squeezed of the hand. And I did it throughout the story. And then I started realizing I had gently squeezed in a couple other stories. So now I cringe whenever I see that. But now I'm seeing you've fallen into that too with gently cupped. So, and by doing that, I lost my spot. Here we are. Okay. Padme cupped his face, making sure he met her eyes. Anakin, you were once a 10-year-old boy brought before the council, someone who had strong attachments to his mother, and yet they saw your potential and chose to train you. Only because it was Qui-Gon's dying wish, and Obi-Wan advocated for it. Nevertheless, your perspective matters, maybe more, especially in a situation like this. You know the struggles of growing up as an outsider to the Jedi, and you can understand that Obi-Wan's son might be going through. Who better to offer a perspective than other masters lack? That other masters lack. I made 2 mistakes in this sentence and I'm a little frustrated, so we're going to try it again. Nevertheless, your perspective matters, maybe more, especially in a situation like this. You know the struggles of growing up as an outsider to the Jedi, and you can understand what Obi-Wan's son might be going through. Who better to offer a perspective that other Jedi masters lack? I was going to put Jedi masters in there. I don't think that's a bad thing, but she's already said Jedi, and I don't know why, but I really wanted to say Jedi Masters. I think it's fine, and I think if I was reading silently to myself, it would have rolled right on by. I think it's fine. I wouldn't suggest changing it or anything, but I did notice that my mouth wanted to put Jedi Masters in there, especially because that's really what she's talking about, and it just really wanted to go in there. So anyhow, I give up. I'm moving on. Okay. Anakin looked at Padme, a little dumbfounded. She was right. By the current rules of the Jedi, they should have sent him packing back to Tatooine as soon as he'd shown up at the temple with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan all those years ago. They had said all along Anakin was too risky to train. He had come from a humble background, butted heads constantly and pressed many boundaries. Yet now he stood as a Jedi Master. Perhaps he did have a unique perspective to offer after all. I hadn't thought of that. Seems having my attachments might be beneficial to the council for once. Anakin's lips curled into a grin, a chuckle escaping him. Padme smiled. I'm pausing because we have a comma and quotations, and I feel like this line could go right up here at the end of this one, and we could just make that a period. And this could be a new paragraph right here. So that's where I'm going to read it from. Padme smiled and laughed lightly in response, though he could tell by the slight tilt of her head and the curious look in her eyes that she was a bit at a loss as to what he found so funny, given their conversation. You know, the thing that I can't quite wrap my head around. Padme gave him a questioning look with a shake of her head and a shrug. Obi-Wan had a one-night stand. Their chuckles soon turned into full laughter, something Anakin realized they both desperately needed. While casual physical relationships were actually quite commonplace among the Jedi, the idea of Obi-Wan, so disciplined and straight-laced, taking part in such a thing was strange. Even though there were still no answers to the difficulties Anakin would face in the temple, he felt lighter. His spirits had lifted, and his burdens were easier to carry. Okay, I said felt. I omitted the felt and put in were easier to carry. I kind of just did that probably because I like to avoid saying felt. It's a personal thing. I do it in my writing. Sometimes I need to leave it in there, and it's just one of those words that I typically try to omit. So anyhow, I'm just going to keep going. Annie, I think we've talked enough for tonight. He smiled and agreed with a nod. Okay, so this is clearly Padme speaking, but then he's speaking right here. So I would like this to be a new paragraph right here. And yeah, and I think that'd be fine. You could add a dialogue tag if you wanted. I'm going to say new paragraph, and I'm going to try to read it as though it is one. He smiled and agreed with a nod. Would you like a distraction from all this? Something to take your mind off things for a while? Padme's words brought a small smile to Anakin's face as he welcomed the change of subject. Okay, so new paragraph, and then this is perfectly fine. Yes, a distraction would be nice, he replied eagerly. She scooted closer on the bed and gently placed his hand on a particular spot on the side of her stomach. Anakin's brow furrowed in concentration as he tried to feel what she was waiting for. Suddenly his eyes lit up and he let out an audible gasp as the tiny kick beneath his palm startled him. A smile spread across his face, and for a moment the weight of their conversation was forgotten. Feel that? Anakin's eyes lit up and he nearly jumped. Yes. You think we need a comma right here? Or a period? I think a period. And then I think everything was well here. I highlighted gently, and we're going to keep going. A wide, toothy grin spread across his face as he watched the lively movements of their unborn children, marveling at the miracle of life. Each little kick against his hand filled him with a sense of wonder and adoration. He turned to Padme, his eyes overflowing with love. I am wondering... Okay, so here he's saying unborn children. I'm pretty sure he knew they were twins, and yet a little bit back... I think he referred to them as one child, and I kind of had dismissed it, being indecisive over whether or not he knew there was two babies. So if we know, we have to be consistent. So I'm kind of like, where did I see that? Okay, I tried to scroll back and look for it, and I can't do... because we're in an AO3 document, I can't do like a search for the word child. My suggestion, I feel like it was in dialogue, and I remember noting it, but then I thought, well, if he doesn't know that they're twins, and now I'm like unsure. Whichever one it is, we have to be consistent. Either it's one child or it's two children and he doesn't know, and so he would speak and refer to it as one child, or they're twins and he knows they're twins, so he would consistently refer to them as twins. I remember noting it, and I just kind of let it go, reasoning it away in my head. So what I would do is a search for the word child and look kind of, especially at dialogue. I feel like he was speaking when he mentioned our child, I feel like, and then it would just be our children. And I won't, I'm not going to spend more time on that, but at the same time, I'm not going to just, next time if I catch something like that again, I'm just going to try to go ahead and pause and say it. I'm inclined to want to let something go if I can reason it away in my head. But now I'm wondering, because he's saying children, so now it made me second guess myself. Okay. But, okay. Let's see. So here we go. Padme, you're amazing, he gushed. Their connection sparked a burning desire within him. Okay, we're going to try that again. Padme, you're amazing, he gushed. Their connection sparked a burning desire within him that he couldn't resist. He pulled her close, their lips meeting in a series of passionate, fiery kisses. And beautiful and radiant. Padme let out a playful giggle, her eyes sparkling with each kiss. Are you sufficiently distracted now, Anakin? She teased. Anakin's grin grew wider, his voice rumbling with a playfulness. Oh, more than sufficiently. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close as their lips met once again. His kisses were filled with apology and longing. He had some making up to do for the past week. And now we're going to switch points of view to Cressida. I remember this. Here we go. The tall arched ceilings loomed above, flanked by smooth stone columns that stood like silent sentinels. Sunlight streamed in through enormous glass windows, casting elongated beams across the polished floor, each illuminated mote of dust seeming suspended in time. Okay. It's reading beautifully, but I'm loving the words, but this is a long sentence. And I kind of thought this could be a period and a capital E here. I'm going to reread it. We're going to try it out. Sunlight streamed in through enormous glass windows, casting elongated beams across the polished floor, each illuminated mote of dust seemingly suspended in time. She felt so small walking through them, but then most people did. She wondered if the hall was an architectural metaphor for their insignificance in the grand scheme of the galaxy, a speck of dust floating about at the mercy of the currents of the force. Great, I'm going to pause for a couple things. I kind of wanted a period and a capital S right here. I kind of want this to be Cressida because we're starting out with her, and it lets your reader know right away whose mind you're in. I happen to know because I've already read this, but I would suggest putting Cressida right there. And then I'm going to complement the deliberate use of dust here. Beautifully done. I like how you've done it, and we're going to keep going. Perhaps she was just reading too much into a large hall. Cressida's footsteps echoed softly through the vast cathedral-like corridor as she left the council chamber. Another long meeting was filled with endless questions which again saw no resolution. She had known from the beginning that her every word and action would be under more intense scrutiny than anyone else's. But that was often the way of things, where children and the ones who carried them were concerned. The table was often tilted, the game unfairly rigged. I like Cressida's mind there, and I completely agree with her. Obi-Wan had not been present for a single meeting since the initial one where she threw his whole organized world into a burlap sack and roughly shook it. She understood why this had been the case, of course. It wasn't as if he could be expected to give a clear-headed and unbiased opinion on anything that was being discussed. I'm going to pause. That one's a little bit long. It read okay. You could probably even put a period here and do a capital I right here. That's one suggestion. It certainly wasn't his fault either, but the power of that single empty chair, whenever she dared to glance in its direction, was impossible to ignore. The absence of its owner pained her. Each step away from the council chambers brought no relief from the guilt she felt. It was a terrible thing she'd done to him. Nothing could change her mind on that. In the span of a single day, she'd irreparably changed everything. Logic demanded she acknowledge that she had done the correct thing, following her duty and protocol, at least as much as her unique situation allowed. But why did it still feel so wrong? She knew the answer. Only after that first day did she realize what she had truly done. She had humiliated him. It had never been her intention, of course. However, like many things in hindsight, she found herself agonizing over what she should have done. Don't we all? I totally am. I'm so with Cressida right now. I'm loving this. Okay. I do think we could get two sentences here a little bit. It had never been her intention, of course, period. Capital H. However, like many things in hindsight, there might be a comma there if we do it that way. I'm not entirely sure. Let's try it. However, like many things in hindsight, she found herself agonizing over what she should have done. All it would have taken was a simple comm call. She knew his frequency. It would have been a minor break in protocol, but would it have been so awful to meet him in the privacy of his quarters and tell him first? In her heart, she thought not, but long-standing procedure for such things demanded the council be addressed first. How horrible a thing to suddenly be put on the spot with no notions as to what had been about to happen, to have his peers looking at him in such judgment and disapproval. Is disapproval with two P's? Is it with two P's? I need to know. It is. Okay. So disapproval, two P's. Suddenly, she couldn't bring herself to complain about her own feelings regarding the council's lengthy inquiries. Their probing questions. She deserved it. I think it's supposed to be probing, so just take the L out right there. And we're going to keep going. Then there was Solon. She couldn't forget those beautiful eyes of his, one gray like a brewing storm and the other blue as a cloudless sky, reflecting shock, betrayal, and disbelief. They were like a maelstrom, turbulent and deep, filled with emotions too vast for one so young. Surely she could have at least prepared him before she dropped a figurative bomb in that chamber. No. She followed protocol. She did what was correct. She couldn't blame herself for the fallout. She knew what to expect. Although she was doing it anyway. It wasn't even really about her. It was about them. There was a bitterness on the back of her mind when she thought of Mace's resistance to allow her the courtesy of informing Obi-Wan or Solon elsewhere. Not before the prying eyes and disparaging gazes of the council. In front of Obi-Wan's Padawan, too. Anakin. Stars. He was so grown from the last time she'd caught a glimpse of him as a boy. He'd been about Solon's size. Sorry, I messed up there, and I don't think it was your fault. I don't think it was a mistake. I think I misread a word, and I've done it a little bit in the paragraph before, but it was very slight. And there was the way it is written is beautiful. I don't know why my mouth wants to swap out teeny tiny little words here and there. Probably because that's the way we'd speak it. I'm not sure. But because I didn't want to suggest a change, I kept reading. Also, it's reading well, and so I'm inclined to proceed reading rather than to assess why my mouth is not saying what it's supposed to, except that the thought that I'm having about it doing that is stopping me now. So I'm going to try again. Stars. He was so grown up from the last time she caught a glimpse of him as a boy. He'd been about Solon's size. The passage of time was an odd thing. All these years later, and there was still the existence of a 10-year-old boy between them. She shook her head and slowed her steps. There was little more she could do aside from hoping for the best, but knowing his reputation had been altered that day. Okay, so this one's a little bit long, and I'm kind of wondering, it read okay. I kind of wondered if it should have a comma, and I also kind of wondered if it could be 2 sentences. I'm just going to note that I'm mused over it, and you can play with it if you want to. Otherwise, we're just going to keep going. So I'm going to start here and just read on down. She shook her head and slowed her steps. There was little more she could do aside from hoping for the best, but knowing his reputation had been altered that day. Maybe new. Maybe I need this to be new. But let's try new and just see if maybe that's what's bothering me. Something is stopping me. She shook her head and slowed her steps. There was little more she could do aside from hope for the best, but knew his reputation had been altered that day. Yes, I think that's it. And I did say hope instead of hoping. I think that's totally a personal preference, whichever one is fine, but I think this might need to be new. Anyway, we're going to keep going. Though, with any luck, not as horribly as hers was, regardless of the damage had been done. Regardless of the damage that had been done? That had been done? Do we need a that between damage and had? Let's just try it. Regardless of the damage that had been done, all she could do was remain optimistic that his name was still in good standing. If it weren't, she'd never forgive herself. Her mind was still awash with thoughts and what-if scenarios, so distracting and loud, but fortunately her feet knew the path back by heart. She just wanted to get back. Each night, she and Solon would stay out together, waiting for the moons to rise. It had become their little routine. Okay, this one, I'm going to suggest a period here and a capital E here. I'm reading it on like that. She just wanted to get back. Each night, she and Solon would stay out together, waiting for the moons to rise. It had become their little routine. Yeah, it had become their little routine. Telling stories and talking late into the night until he couldn't keep his eyes open anymore. Okay, here we go. So a period here, okay? She just wanted to get back, period. Capital each night, she and Solon would stay out together, waiting for the moons to rise, period. Capital I, a comma right here. It had become their little routine, telling stories and talking late into the night until he couldn't keep his eyes open anymore. He'd fall asleep in her arms, and each time he did, it stung her heart more, knowing those precious moments were quickly coming to an end. The council would make a decision eventually, and she knew no matter their verdict, it would pain them both. Until it did, though, she was resolved to enjoy what she could while it lasted, and she picked up the pace. At this time of day, it was blessedly empty, a reprieve from the bustle of the Jedi Temple. Quiet was what she needed: peace, tranquility, guidance. But an instinctive prickle at the back of her neck told her she was not alone. She stiffened imperceptibly, resisting the urge to whip her head around and examine her surroundings or take cover. She drew in a breath, steeling herself, keeping her pace consistent as she rounded a corner, turning down another hallway leading to an open veranda. The sun was behind her, and its beams of light on the floor gave away no shadows that followed, yet the sensation of being watched persisted. She slipped out onto a balcony, concealed momentarily by the very shadows that spoke to her of her surroundings, her heart beating in her chest with a mix of apprehension and anticipation. Seconds later, the figure emerged onto the balcony. Their confusion... I'm contemplating whether or not that should... I missed that. We had such a good rhythm going. Let me just try it again. Maybe I needed a pause for myself. Let's just try it and see what happens. Seconds later, the figure emerged onto the balcony, their confusion evident as they surveyed the seemingly empty area. With practiced ease, it says with a practiced ease or with practiced ease. Either one I think is fine. With a practiced ease, why am I tripping over that? I'm going to omit the A and see what happens. With practiced ease, she circled around, her movements smooth and stealthy, marking her presence with the quiet confidence of one who dwelled in darkness with as much comfort as one who basked in the rays of the sun. The figure lowered its hood, and to her surprise, she knew the back of that particular head. It turned. The face of a familiar Keldor master regarded her. Though obscured by the mask and goggles necessary for him to breathe in oxygen-rich environments, Cressida could see the subtle crinkles around his eyes, the only telltale sign of a smile from the otherwise stoic Jedi Master. When last I knew you, I saw only a young Padawan. Now I see that same Padawan in the Jedi Knight before me, he greeted, his voice filled with warmth. And a fierce mother as well, Plo Koon added. Time has shaped you well, Bright Eyes. She had missed Master Plo and his comforting presence, though she hadn't expected to encounter him outside of the council chambers. Cressida smiled, touched by the sentiment, and with a lightness in her step, she closed the little gap between, embracing the kindly figure and a much-needed hug. A comma or a period or something right there. We're going to keep going. Plo Koon returned the embrace with his hand lifting to pat her back in a fatherly manner before falling away. It's good to see you again, Cressida. He tilted his head to one side and then the other as he studied her. Your complexion carries a warmth that suggests a harsher sun than our own here, he mused, his voice carrying an inquisitive tone as he turned her palms over to look intently. And these hands of yours, they've taken on certain ruggedness. It seems you've been through more than just rigorous training. Perhaps some form of labor? The observation was not a question, but a gentle probe, an attempt to bridge the gap of the years she had been absent. Perhaps Cressida's expression remained composed, though a flicker of amusement passed through her eyes. I've been where I needed to be. Your strength has always been evident, Bright Eyes, he replied. It is good to see it has not waned. He gestured back to the hall, and the two began to walk again. As they strolled side by side, the midday light played upon Cressida's auburn hair, casting warm glows that echoed the sentiment of their reunion. Plo Koon, ever observant, glanced sideways at her, taking in the confidence in her stride, the set of her shoulders, so much like the warriors of old. Your journey has been fraught with trials, a Jedi and a mother, he noted, the timbre of his voice humming through the breather. And yet, here you stand, unwavering. Both paths have taught me much. Indeed, the Force flows uniquely within you, he replied, acknowledging her dual roles with a nod. Balancing such destinies is no small feat. Deva Relu would be proud. She offered a sad smile and then nodded, not trusting herself to speak on the subject of her late master. It has always grieved me that I couldn't be there for you after his death, nor could I see your training through to its completion. I often wondered who guided you after this passing. The shadows can be as illuminating as they are concealing, she said cryptically. Some lessons are learned in the quietest of places. Plo Koon chuckled to himself. Indeed, he mused. He tilted his head slightly. How is your son? A most resilient boy, he seems. Is he like his father, smart and sharp? Or perhaps he takes more after his mother's wandering and mischievous spirit. Cressida chuckled softly, the tension easing from her shoulders. Resilient, but restless. He has much of his father in him. Sometimes I fear the position I've put him in. There is little balance in his life right now. Peace escapes the both of us, she confessed. Ah, but lest you forget, peace is often found in the eye of the storm, Cressida, he reassured her, and balance can always be found, even in the heart of chaos. Plo Koon reminded her so much of her master, and she missed them both dearly. To walk beside a man who had shared such a friendship with Deva Rulu made the long, empty hallway still made her feel smallest. Okay, we're going to try that one again. To walk beside a man who had shared such a friendship with Deva Rulu made the long, empty hallway made her feel small but less alone. Something is not working about this sentence. To walk beside a man who had shared such a friendship with Deva Rulu made the long, empty hallway. What do you want it to feel? Because she's still feeling small but less alone. I don't know. You're going to have to play with that one because there's like three kind of little things in here where it could be go a couple different ways. It's like they were kind of like incomplete thoughts. So I'm going to leave that one and we're going to keep going. Tell me what you can. I wish to know more about the son of Obi-Wan Kenobi and Cressida Vox, my almost Padawan. And now we switch again. I think this time we're with Solon. Oh, or time has passed. No, she's gone from her conversation with Plo Koon to now she's going to go talk to Solon. So she's moved. Okay, got it. All right, now I'm with you. I would start with Cressida to make it very clear that we're still with Cressida beneath this little break. She found Solon lying on his back on the bed, his legs propped up against the wall, feet rhythmically swinging back and forth by the heel like a living metronome, occasionally bumping into the wall with a soft thud. His eyes were glazed over with boredom as he passively wielded the force to build a tower of fruit beside him like any other child might use blocks or stones. It was impressive, to say the least, and it answered the question of where all the fruit had vanished off to. There was a glistening Keldabi pear at the base, followed by several Tatooine figs. Above them, a purple bloop fruit perched, its blue and bumpy surface contrasting with the smoothness of the Keldabi pear. At the very top, a small Minok fruit, a green orb with a faint bioluminescent glow, teetered. The act of stacking the fruit was so second nature that he didn't need to concentrate on it. It was as second nature to him as breathing. He let out a big yawn, but kept swinging his feet, making the tower wobble briefly. I'm loving this intro. And I'm just going to note that I noticed the repetition here, but I think that it's acceptable in this use. So we're going to keep going. It would have been amusing had it not been for the mix of irritation and gloom etched on his young face. His mouth curled into a sort of unamused scowl, and he blew out a breath that sent several strands of his hair fluttering up before falling back to his brow. We're still good. Yep. Okay. A little precarious for modern architecture, don't you think? She asked him from the doorway. Startled by the sudden interruption, Solon's concentration broke, and the carefully constructed tower toppled onto the floor. A plump fig bounced off the top and landed squarely on his nose. He scrambled to sit up, clutching his sore nose with an irritated grumbled "ow." As he looked up, he found himself face to face with his mother. We need some punctuation in here. Maybe a period here. We have an echo on his nose, too. He scrambled to sit up, clutching his... What if it was clutching his face with an irritated... Ow. Okay, so this sentence is tripping me up right here. So we're missing some punctuation here, but I kind of don't like irritated and grumbled paired together. And we have an echo on nose. So we could do, he scrambled to sit up, rubbing his face with an irritated ow or grumbling ow or I would say irritated. Grumbling and irritated ow. How's this? He scrambled to sit up, rubbing his face. He scrambled upright, clutching his face. Something. You have a lot of different options right there. And I get that we want him to grumble. I mean, you could almost have him. As he looked up, he found himself face to face with his mother. Yeah, we don't want to have face because then we have an echo on face. He scrambled to sit up, clutching his sore nose, rubbing his face. I don't know. You're gonna have to play with that one. There's a lot of options with it. That's why I'm so indecisive. Is because you have a lot of different things you can do with that one. It could be 2 sentences because you're trying to get him to grumble his ow. We have a word echo we're dealing with. We have 2 words together that could probably be moved around a little bit. Yeah, there's a lot you can do with that one. So I'm just going to leave it alone because it's a lot to play with. And all right, we're going to keep going. Feeling peckish, she asked with a grin. I think we're missing quotation marks right here. Feeling peckish, quotation marks, she asked with a grin. To her dismay, Solon didn't smile. He got off the bed and began picking up the fruit to place in the bowl it had come from, still rubbing his nose. Need me to take a look at that? She asked. Period. Capital H. He shook his head and wriggled his nose. Oh, we got nose like 4 times. You could play with that too. Thinking a lot of the different words you use for nose, a Jedi would not use. So it's like you could almost refer to it in this case instead of saying nose again, because we know that that's what he's talking about. What they're talking about right here. She asked. Period. He shook his head and wriggled it as if testing for soreness. Want to talk? Nothing to talk about, he said, finally speaking, and sat back on his bed. It wasn't what she was hoping to hear. You could tell me how you're feeling, she offered, taking a tentative step into the room. You won't like it, Solon offered, biting the inside of his cheek. I have got the perfect visual of a pouty little boy, so well done. She offered him a small smile before sitting beside him, her outstretched hand calling the offending fig to rest in her grasp. Digging her nails into the tough, cracked brown skin, she began to peel it away. The fig felt like a perfect metaphor for their situation. Patience, precision, and perseverance would reveal the fruits of their labor. What exactly that reward was going to be, she wasn't sure. She just hoped that it wouldn't be as tough to reach as the fig's leathery skin was to tear. I'm going to try that line again. Actually, I'm really frustrated I messed it up, so we're going to go back one more. What exactly that reward was going to be, she wasn't sure. She just hoped that it wouldn't be as tough to reach as the fig's leathery skin was to tear. I'm starting to miss the cavern, he admitted. She paused mid-peel, only having begun to reveal the deep, purple, jewel-like seeds inside the fig. The initial shock of his words hit her, but it quickly gave way to understanding. While it wasn't what she wanted to hear, she could see his point. Back in the caverns, dangerous and lonely as they were, he at least had the comfort of routine and a sense of purpose. Almost 2 standard weeks. I'm loving this. It's beautiful. I can see her pausing and looking at it. I got it. It's beautiful. I love it. Great job. That was how long they had been kept waiting. While Cressida had meetings, briefings, and debriefings to attend, Solon had no such commitments. The monotony was clearly wearing on him. I kind of don't want the adverb in there. I think it detracts from your beautiful voice, so I'm just going to try it again without it. The monotony was wearing on him. A fresh wave of guilt gnawed at her. She had been neglecting him these past few days. Solon was old enough to look after himself, but even the most mature 10-year-old could only take so much isolation. Meditation was far from a fun way to pass the time, and he'd always struggled with it. She plucked a few of the pulpy seeds from the fig and handed them to him, watching as he examined them curiously. Eat the seeds, they're good for you, she urged, and he popped the fruit in his mouth. The crisp flavor bursting on his tongue seemed to amuse him, or at least raise his spirits. She tossed a few into her mouth and chewed through the soft seed pods as she chose her words carefully. Okay, so it worked. I still like it. It's working. For a second, I was like, she can't taste the flavor, but she knows what the flavor is. So I get that. And so that's why it ended up working for me. For a second, my beta brain was on going alert. And then I was like, wait, I think it's okay. I'm going to go with I think it's okay. We're going to keep moving. I understand your frustration, Solon. The council is slow to change, but they are changing. The fact that it's taken them so long to reach a decision suggests they're considering many outcomes, one of which is far-reaching change within the order. We just need to be patient a little longer. Everyone says that. Solon looked up at his mother, frustration evident in his eyes. But it feels like we're being punished, doesn't it? His logic was difficult to refute, and to a boy whose only crime was existing, she could certainly see how he might be tempted to think that. If this is a period, this would start a capital. Or should this be... I am not the best at this, but I can tell you if this is a period, if you want a period here, this has to be a capital here. But other than that, we're going to keep going. If the council were to punish us, you would know it, she replied, her tone carrying a strong suggestion that she knew what she was talking about. No one is being punished, least of all you. He gave the obligatory nod and accepted another few purple seeds, rolling them between his fingers before eating them. But the disappointment and malice still lingered in his expression. I thought I would be training by now, he said with a shrug, or at least have a chance to speak with my father and get to know him. Her heart ached, and she'd have given him anything to grant. I'm going to stop because my brain is going, don't forget, and it's messing me up. I'm noting that there was another use of expression here, and the frustration in my voice is towards myself because my brain would not let me continue reading until I said it out loud. And so now we're going to try again right here. Her heart ached, and she'd have given. Okay, we're going to go again. Her heart ached, and she'd have given anything to grant him the answers he sought. But she couldn't. All she could do was keep peeling the fruit that had reddened his nose. I know, she said with a nod and a gentle bump of her shoulder to his. But these things take time. I'm sure he wants to speak with you, but he needs to process the news he received. It doesn't come easy to learn you're a parent. It's been forever. Solon's irritation surfaced, and he frowned. It hadn't been forever, but to a child, boredom certainly could make it seem that way. He was so different before, he said, his voice laced with confusion. Did you know he talked to me outside the council chambers? She shook her head. Somehow that little detail slipped her notice. He was so friendly and nice. He seemed excited to talk to me, and he was just really nice. Solon had seen his father's warmth and charm firsthand, and to suddenly find himself devoid of such comfort would have been hard. I almost want that to be must. Must have been hard. I mean, it's fine with would. It's fine. I don't know, because he's experienced it, and that's kind of what she's noticing, she's observing, and she knows that feeling herself. So I kind of feel like she's empathizing with him, and I kind of want it to be must. Okay, we're going to try it with must, and we're just going to keep going. Solon had seen his father's warmth and charm firsthand, and to suddenly find himself devoid of such comfort must have been hard. She knew exactly how she felt, having known that aching absence for 10 years. She placed a comforting hand on his shoulder, trying to provide some perspective. I think this could be he felt. She knew exactly how he felt, having known that aching absence for 10 years. She placed a comforting hand on his shoulder, trying to provide some perspective. And I almost want this scene to be experienced. Solon had experienced his father's warmth and charm firsthand. Seen it is fine too, but it works. I just want that for you. If I made these little changes, let's see if I am able to remember what I have said and read it as well. Solon had experienced his father's warmth and charm firsthand, and to suddenly find himself devoid of such comfort must have been hard. She knew exactly how he felt, having known that aching absence for 10 years. She placed a comforting hand on his shoulder, trying to provide some perspective. I like it, but that's my suggestion. We're going to keep going. When we walked into that council chamber, your father's whole life was changed, she explained as gently as she could. He became a father. That's not something that one simply makes peace with overnight. I had months while I was waiting for you to be born, and I learned to be your mother as well as a Jedi. Your father hasn't had the opportunity to do so yet. It doesn't mean he cares any less about you, Solon. It doesn't mean he cares at all, Solon countered, gesturing with his hands as if drawing attention to his point. His words weren't entirely untrue, but he was seeing things through a child's eyes, because he was, of course, a child. The stories I told you about your father weren't real, but everything I've ever told you about General Obi-Wan Kenobi is. Give your father the benefit of the doubt. He deserves nothing less. He seemed to accept this, but also didn't seem convinced. He's done nothing wrong, and neither have you. I'm highlighting a little extra space right here. I'm going to keep going. The urge to take the blame once more rose up, but she pushed it back down. Even if she thought the circumstances were her fault, it would only sour things more. It would make Solon feel bad again, make him think everything was his fault, and that was unacceptable. It wasn't Solon's responsibility to ease his mother's feelings, nor was it fair for her to force him into the role to comfort her. That was her job. Though weary from her endless meetings, she didn't want to leave the day like this. She was determined to see him smile again. An idea popped into her head. She leaned in closer with a playful shoulder nudge and a light-hearted smile played on her lips. Do you want to go for a run? The result was instantaneous. Solon's eyes brightened and his face lit up. Without hesitation, he nodded eagerly, a burst of energy propelling him to his feet. He stumbled a bit as he scrambled to put on his boots, the eagerness to embark on this adventure outweighing any hindrances. So much so that in his haste, he managed to get on one boot only to realize he'd put it on the wrong foot. Okay, I'm going to note an extra space right here. We're now either passing time or changing points of view. Here we go. Are you kidding? That's so high, Solon exclaimed, looking back to his mother after she highlighted the path they would take. It just looks high, she said with a wink. Golden light bathed the stately grounds of the Jedi Temple as Cressida led Solon onto the vertiginous parapet of grand columns that would serve as their stepping stones. With the sun warming their backs, they stood poised at the edge of adventure. Won't we get into trouble? Solon asked apprehensively, looking around at the bystanders who meandered around them with lessons of their own. She looked around as if gauging the possible reactions. A quick sweep across the courtyard didn't seem to concern her, and she shrugged. They'd have to catch us first, she replied with some well-earned smugness tugging at the corners of her mouth. Solon's face broke out into a grin as he started bouncing on his toes in anticipation. Her words seemed to chase away his doubt. Cressida watched Solon with a keen eye as he examined the course. His heterochromatic gaze flickered over the obstacles, and she could almost see the wheels turning in his mind. There was a moment of apprehension, quickly replaced by a focused intensity. It was as if he were analyzing the run like a complex puzzle or mathematical problem, the intricate calculations visibly unfolding in his eyes. His concentration was palpable, and Cressida marveled at how his young mind seemed to grasp the challenge with a cosmic precision. Ready? Cressida replied, both, as a challenge and encouragement. He exhaled deeply, easing the tension in his body. He reached behind himself, interlacing his fingers and twisting his upper body from side to side, causing his joints to crack satisfyingly. I kind of wanted that to be a satisfying crack to his joints, but I'm just going to roll with it. The sound made Cressida wince, and I'm going to suggest we get rid of the adverb. I mean, this was also, you could omit this adverb and it's going to work just as well, and then omit the other adverb. And actually, what I'm going to do is read this paragraph without those two adverbs and show you that it'll be just as great, if not better, without them. He exhaled deeply, easing the tension in his body. He reached behind himself, interlacing his fingers and twisting his upper body from side to side, causing his joints to crack. The sound made Cressida wince, though whether from pain or envy she couldn't quite tell. It made her nostalgic for the days when her own joints were endlessly malleable. Solon then positioned himself in front of her, crouching slightly with one foot ahead of the other, his weight forward and ready to spring into action. So we had 2 more adverbs as we kept going, and you don't need them. Honestly, if you take them out, it's going to read better. It made her nostalgic for the days when her own joints were malleable. You could even say more malleable. Solon then positioned himself in front of her, crouching with one foot ahead of the other, his weight forward and ready to spring into action. I have a better visual of it without the adverb. Yeah, I kind of have a runner's pose in my mind, so yes, that is what I suggest. Then follow my lead, Cressida said with a confident smile. With a fluid motion, she pushed off from the column, her body slicing through the air like a dancer mid-leap. Solon followed instinctively, feeling a rush of excitement as he propelled himself forward. She moved like a comet streaking across the sky, and he was her trailing light, learning, mimicking, and reveling in her expertise. The thrill of the free run ignited something deep within Solon. His every step became more sure, more in tune with the rhythm of the chase. As they raced together, he felt the force surge through his veins, fueling him like a spark to dry kindling. His mother's pace was challenging, but he matched her stride for stride, his energy a mirror of hers, sometimes outpacing it. I'm just going to point, you can remove that adverb. It's going to read beautifully with or without it. Keep it, let it go, just noting it. Noting that I noticed it. We're going to keep going. The temple, once serene and still, transformed into their playground. They bounded over bridges and vaulted over walls, their movements synchronized like a carefully choreographed dance. As they skimmed over a polished stone bridge, Cressida's silhouette reflected in the tranquil pond below, followed closely by Solon's. The water rippled with each step, their reflections breaking into fleeting, ghostly shapes that vanished as quickly as they appeared. So you've got some adverbs in there, but they worked okay for me. They were not disruptive. I just took note of them. There's like 3 that I saw. But I'm also going to note that the visuals are beautiful, and I am following along, and I'm absolutely loving the visuals. We're just going to keep going. Cressida led the way up the temple's smooth stone walls, scaling them effortlessly. Solon followed, his initial hesitation dissolving with each step. His fingers brushed the cool stone as he moved, feeling the ancient temple's quiet strength beneath his hands. The trepidation that once held him back was replaced by bubbling excitement. Each leap felt like flying, every landing a triumph. Glancing back, Cressida's heart swelled with pride. Solon was no longer just following. He was thriving. His feet found solid ground with confidence, and where none existed, the force seemed to lift him just enough to carry him forward. He moved with a grace that belied his age, and for a moment she caught a glimpse of the Jedi he would one day become. They approached the training courtyards, the final stretch of their exhilarating circuit. Cressida's movements remained fluid, her body vaulting from wall to meditation chamber, her hair trailing behind her like a banner of fire. Solon's pace faltered slightly, but before he could slow down completely, she called out, "Push your limits, Solon. Let the force guide you." So I'm really caught up in what's happening here, but at the same time, I'm finding the adverbs in this one distracting. You can let faltered stand on its own. It's a good verb. So I would just take that out. No one's going to miss it. And then you might even be able to keep completely if you want. Solon's pace faltered, but before he could slow down, she called out, "Push your limits, Solon. Let the force guide you." So I read it without both of them, and I think it read beautifully. So I would take them both out. Let's see. Her words spurred him on, and with renewed determination he surged forward, his legs pumped with purpose, and the world around him blurred into a swirl of colors and sounds. Wind rushed past his ears, the distant hum of lightsabers mingling with the murmur of voices from afar. He focused on the path ahead, feeling the force within him, guiding every movement. As they neared the end of their run, Cressida landed with the quiet grace of a whisper, her boots barely making a sound as they touched the swarm stone. Okay, so the adverb distracted me again, but it could just be a reader brain thing. I mean, I feel like it's a personal preference on this. I think it's fine. I think my reader brain is just kind of on a high alert. So we're going to try it again, and we're going to try to control myself or my brain, which good luck to me on that one, but here we go. As they neared the end of their run, Cressida landed with the quiet grace of a whisper, her boots I think making barely is what's doing it. why I'm not even able to get through it. Her boots barely making a sound. I think we need to flip-flop these two words. Barely making a sound as they touched. Yeah, let's try that. Okay, let's try it. As they neared the end of their run, Cressida landed with the quiet grace of a whisper, her boots barely making a sound as they touched the warm stone. Solon followed suit, his feet hitting the ground with a solid thud before he rolled forward, absorbing the impact with a newfound fluidity that surprised even him. For a moment, they both stood still, catching their breath. Then Solon's face split into a wide grin, and laughter bubbled out of him, infectious and joyful. Cressida was filled with relief and happiness at the sight. Whatever soreness or aches tomorrow might bring, they would be worth it. Seeing him this happy, this free, was a reward all on its own. Do all Jedi train that way? Solon asked, his chest heaving. Well, I certainly did, she replied with a smile and her hands settling on her hips. But no two Jedi have the same training. Each one is unique, just like the individuals themselves. She paused for a moment, stroking Solon's wild hair back into place. He looked so much like his father just then. But no matter the training, Cressida continued, swallowing down the bubble of nostalgia, there's always one important lesson to look before you leap. Beautiful paragraph. Just beautiful. I love it. I'm going to keep going. That was fun. Can we do that again, or do we have to return to our room now? She wasn't sure she had the energy for another run, but the way he sounded, almost worried about returning, made her stop and shake her head. Okay, so because I saw she after the dialogue, like I knew this was him, but after I saw she here, I wanted to think it was Cressida. My mind kind of was like, oh, should I switch points of view in my head? What is happening? So I'm just going to note that, and we're going to keep going. I don't know about again, but this is our home. A little gap right there. She said, gently patting his shoulder. We're not under house arrest. How about a walk through the gardens? They're beautiful this time of day, and I used to love spending time there. Solon nodded and fell in step beside her as she swept an arm around his shoulders, leading the way. The scent of blossoms filled the air, and the soft rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze created a soothing melody. She could feel the weight of their stares, the quiet murmur of whispered conversations just out of earshot. The Jedi around them weren't used to seeing such casual closeness between a knight and a youngling. Their bond, full of warmth and affection, stood out in a place where emotional distance was the norm. Yet Cressida didn't flinch or falter. She knew they were watching, questioning, and perhaps even judging, but she chose to walk on undisturbed, letting their whispers fade into the background. All would be revealed in time, one way or another. Solon, however, seemed less bothered and more curious by the attention. His eyes flicked from one Jedi to another, absorbing the subtle shifts in their expressions. He studied the curious glances, the way they lingered a moment too long. She could sense his mind working, trying to understand why they were being watched so closely, why their bond drew so much attention. She knew a question was forming on his lips even before he turned to her. Why is it forbidden for a Jedi to love? She remembered when she had asked a similar question. All Jedi did at one point or another. She was around 12 years old when she approached Master Deva Relu with her inquiries about the complexities of emotions. Her curiosity had more to do with developing crushes rather than forming attachments. Young love was a fickle thing. I'm going to pause myself. It's reading beautifully. I kind of think this is an opportunity right here to show him kind of peering up at his mom with I just kind of see him peering up at his mom with like his little boyish features. And he's asking such a grown question. And he's a child's mind. So I have this visual of him, but I kind of think this is an opportunity for you to show that right here. We're going to keep going. It's not that love itself is forbidden. It's the attachments that can be dangerous if we allow them to dominate our emotions. She began, briefly marveling at how now here she was, a mother teaching her son the same way Master Deva Relu taught her so many years ago. Okay, I got the sentence out, but these two together kind of tripped me up. She began, briefly marveling at how here she was. I would say take out the now. Yeah, I think I would. At how here she was, a mother teaching her son the same way Master Deva Relu taught her so many years ago. Yep, that's my suggestion. Dangerous? How can love hurt someone? He wondered aloud. Cressida continued with calm reassurance. It's not that love brings danger. However, if we're not careful, our love can lead us to actions driven by fear of possessiveness, lying, cheating, or even harming others to protect someone we care about. These actions can betray our values and lead us away from the path of balance. Solon looked puzzled. But isn't having something to fight for what makes us strong? Love can indeed provide strength, especially in challenging times, but it's crucial to maintain balance. The Jedi teachings caution against letting love turn into an obsession or a tool for manipulation. We must keep our emotions in check to avoid making decisions that could bring harm to ourselves. To others or ourselves. To remain compassionate. Solon listened intently. But how can a Jedi be compassionate if they don't allow themselves to feel love? Cressida's gaze softened as she met his eyes. There was still so much he was missing on the subject, but it couldn't easily be absorbed in a single conversation. It was a common misconception that the Jedi didn't feel anything at all. Nothing could be further from the truth. It was more about putting a regulator on emotions than denying them. Compassion and love are not the same as attachment. We can be compassionate without letting our emotions control us. It's about finding harmony within ourselves and acting with wisdom. Solon frowned slightly. I kind of wanted this to be just Solon frowned. Solon frowned. Sounds like it's safer to be alone. Cressida's heart ached at his words. She crouched to his level, her voice gentle. Being alone doesn't protect you from hurt. Love can bring vulnerability, but it also brings joy and fulfillment. We connect with others through love and find purpose in our lives. So it's like you can't love, but you can't let love make you selfish or cloud your judgment? Cressida nodded. It was a rough take, but some understandings only came with age, and Solon was still very young. More or less, a life without love is no life at all, but we must balance it with wisdom and responsibility. Love helps us grow and gives us strength, and we must remain vigilant. As they walked through the temple grounds, Cressida paused beside a planter of vibrant flowers. She missed such beautiful flowers as little grew in the harsh climate they lived in for the last 10 years. It's true, many Jedi avoid exploring these feelings entirely. They feel it's safer to just never entangle themselves with them. Solon murmured, "You did." "I had a very good reason to," Cressida gave him a wink. "I don't have all the answers to your questions, Solon." She looked from the flower to him. "But rest assured, you are asking the right ones." "So what happens now?" he asked, a hint of apprehension in his voice. Cressida sighed softly, her brows furrowing with concern. "I'm not entirely sure, Solon," she admitted, "but I think the Jedi Council will reach a decision soon. They are deliberating on the best course of action for you." "Why is it so hard for them to decide what to do?" Solon asked. Cressida's eyes softened as she looked at him with compassion. "Because you're not like other younglings," she replied simply. "Your path deviates from what is considered the norm for any child within the order." I think I had noted before in my previous read that there was lots of compassion. I'm seeing a lot. I think I'm noticing less of it, but they actually talked about it up here, so that might be why I'm noticing it down here. I think it's fine because they were talking about it to use it in the way that you're using it now. I think that's why I'm noticing it. So it's fine. Let's see. "I guess that makes sense," he admitted, reluctantly, kicking a small rock. I kind of want to take out the reluctantly and just have him kick at the rock. It's such a little boy thing to do. "I guess that makes sense," he admitted, kicking a small rock. "But it still shouldn't be this complicated." "You're right, it shouldn't be," she agreed wholeheartedly on that one. One could always trust that leaving things to adults would inevitably lead to more complexities than the initial query. "Why can't you just train me?" Solon asked, looking up at her with hope in his eyes. "You already started, and you know how to teach me anyway." "Because I have a job to do as a sentinel, and you need to answer to a master who isn't your mother. Masters learn from Padawans as much as Padawans learn from their masters. You need someone who can guide you impartially and help you grow. I can't do that as your mother." "Could father train me?" he asked quietly. She hesitated for a moment, avoiding a direct answer that she knew would only sting him. "Your father has his journey as a Jedi. We never stop learning," she replied. He scrunched up his... I don't want a period here and a capital H. Or, she replied as he scrunched up his face in dissatisfaction, and she conceded. Yeah, let's try that. Just put an "as" right here, and I think it'll flow better. Let's try the line again. Your father has his journey as a Jedi. We never stop learning, she replied as he scrunched up his face in dissatisfaction. She conceded. Probably not. I'd put a comma here and I'd take that out and have she conceded. That's my suggestion. Keep rolling. What if the council won't train me? What will happen to me? Will they make me leave? Cressida felt a surge of heat rise in her chest, her grip on Solon's hand tightening. The idea of them sending him away after everything they had been through made her blood simmer. Solon, if the council decides not to train you and they make you leave the temple, then I leave it with you. Her voice came out sharper than she intended, but she didn't pull back. I didn't endure 10 years of keeping you alive just to let a bunch of council members who've grown too comfortable in their cushy seats to deny my son his birthright. If they can't see what's right in front of them, then maybe they've forgotten what it truly means to be a Jedi, and I can't trust them to teach my son. She could feel Solon's gaze on her, wide-eyed and uncertain. His usual calm, thoughtful expression gave way to surprise. Really? You would leave? Solon asked, disbelieving. Cressida took a deep breath, softening her voice, but not her resolve. Yes, Solon. Anywhere you want. He fell silent for a moment, and she could see his young mind turning, weighing possibilities that felt too heavy for his age. What if? Careful with those words, Solon. They're dangerous. What if? She cut him off, her eyes narrowing slightly as she leaned closer. Those 2 words will twist you into knots. You'll torment yourself over things that may never be and lose sight of what's right in front of you. She paused, forcing her tone to ease as she placed a hand on his shoulder. Focus on the present. And I know. Be patient. Solon sighed, rolling his eyes slightly. I don't like being patient. Cressida couldn't help but smile at that, the tension in her easing a little. His honesty was a reminder of just how young he still was, despite the weight he carried. She ruffled his hair gently, her touch lingering with a softness that belied the fierce determination still simmering beneath the surface. Too bad. Okay. Oh, she thanked me again at the bottom there. Okay, really quick. There's a slightly up here. I think we might have liked that word this chapter because I think it pops up again. It pops up again right here. And I think I read without the adverb. I can't remember. Let's see. And I think we have gently a lot too. So I would probably screen. If I was looking at the original document, I'd probably do a search for gently and for slightly and see how many times you've used it. I would note those two. This was, I think, a beautiful read. I loved the visuals. I liked the fruit. I liked the run. I liked this moment, and I actually was really caught up in this little exchange between Solon and Cressida toward the end. I have a really good visual of it. I was very caught up in what they were saying and the interaction between the mother and son. I really loved it. So, well done. I think the revision was really good for you. I love it. Thank you. Thank you for letting me read it again. It was beautiful. Thank you so much. I hope you guys have a wonderful afternoon or day, whatever time of day it is for you, wherever you're at. And I will see you guys next time on Mystery Red Reads.